Hello, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. And this time we're going to be looking at creating this departure board title effect. And this is a good example of a project where getting yourself good and organised at the beginning can really pay dividends down the line. So let's get started. This project is 1280-720 and the frame rate is 24 frames a second. I'm going to take my default group and I'm going to call that geometry. Then I'm going to hit R for the rectangle tool and I'm going to drag out a small rectangle about that size and I'm going to call that flap. And I'm going to hit this arrow here to center it up. Come to geometry, set a roundness value of 4. And then I'm going to type in some values here in the control points. So minus 55, 70, I'm just tabbing between them. 55, 70, 55, minus 70, minus 55, minus 70. Pretty easy to do and a good idea if you want everything to line up. Okay, so first of all I'm going to set the colour for that flap to dark grey, somewhere like that. And then I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate that. And I'm going to call that outer. I'm going to turn off outer for a second, come back to flap, come to the properties, and I'm going to set the X scale to 2000. And I'm going to turn it off again. I'll come back to outer, shape. I want to use the outline and not the fill. I'm going to turn up the width to 12 and make sure I've set preserve width. And I'm going to set that to a very dark grey like that. Come to its properties and just scale it up to 118. And then I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate that. I'm going to call this inner. Set this to a lighter grey, somewhere about that. And come to the properties, and here I'm going to set the scale of the inner to something smaller, 114, like so. Turn off the geometry, come up here, make a new group, Command Shift N. I'm going to call this slots grid, because this is going to be the row of slots that you saw in the introduction. And I'm going to hit L to make a replicator, like so. I'm going to drag outer over the top of this cell. Rename that outer. And I'm going to take inner and drag it over the replicator and add it as a replicator cell. And I'm going to come to the replicator itself and I'm going to set the shape to line and the start to minus 480 on X and the end to 480 on X and the number of points to 8. And now you see I've got my grid of slots. Just to tidy that up and make it look really nice, I'm going to add a filter, stylize, and I'm going to apply my favourite indent filter to that replicator group, like so. The relative brightness of those two greys is what determines the 3D look. So, okay, I'm fairly happy with that. I'm going to call that slots grid. And the next step is to start building the text. So I'm going to make yet another group, Command Shift N, and I'm going to call this text. Enable the text tool. And now I want to use a fixed width font, fixed width. And the reason for that obviously is I want to make sure that I fill all my holes precisely. So I'm going to select fixed width and from the menu I'm going to choose Andale Mono. I'm going to set the size to 140 and the tracking to 38. And the alignment to center. And then I'm going to type motion 5, motion space 5 I should say. Center that up, bring it down on Y till it fills the holes. And I'm just going to come to the style outline, turn on the outline. Don't want it to be red, I want it to be white. And I'm just going to increase the width to 2. So as you see, that's quite a good trick for fattening up text that doesn't have a bold version, as in this case. So I like that. I'm going to duplicate that, Command D, come back to Format, and I'm going to type my second bit of text, which is tutorial. There we go. So I've got my front and my back text. In fact, I'm going to call this back, and I'm going to call this front. It might make life easier as we go along. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clone my front text. So I'm going to hit K, make a clone of that. Let me just call that front text. Make it easy to spot when we do the next bit. I'm going to make a new group, Command Shift N. I'm going to call this a flap bottom, and to it I'm going to add the flap, move shape to group, add the flap, and I'm going to, over the top of that, add the front text. And let's turn off the text, and we don't need our slots grid at the moment. I need to turn that flap on. Okay, so now that's not quite what we want. We actually need is to chop out just the first letter, and not just the first letter, the bottom half of the first letter. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to take the inner shape and I'm going to duplicate it, Command D, and I'm going to call this flap mask, and then I'm going to drag that on top of a flap bottom and move mask to group, not shape to group, like so. And now you see I've got a slot there that is cutting out the text and the flap. I'm going to move that to -480, and now it's just selecting my first letter. Let me zoom in for this next bit so we can see a bit better what's going on. Come to the edit points, and I'm going to select the two top points, and just looking at the geometry here, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and I'm going to drag those down till I get a value of -3, like that. Might just reduce that roundness down to 3, just like that. Now you might want to do something a bit snazzier than that, which is to make it flat across the top. But I'm just going quickly here using the roundness because I want a rounded corners at the bottom. But you can do whatever you want. And I make a new group now and call it a flap 3D. I'm going to hit Control D to make it 3D, and I'm going to drag a flat bottom into it. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that group. Command D, and I'm going to call it B flap, and let's call this B flap top. I'm going to open up that group, and I'm going to take the flap mask, come to the properties, and I'm going to rotate it through 180 degrees. Aha! So now that mask is masking the top. The other thing I need to do is come to my text, bearing in mind this is B, I want my back text, so I'm going to drag that over the text there, like so. Probably shouldn't have called that front text, that's probably not a good idea. It's not going to matter too much. Okay, so I've got two flaps of text. What I'm next going to do is I'm going to duplicate this latest B flat group, Command D, and I'm going to call it A/B flap. And I'm going to open it up, and this group here I'm going to rename B flap bottom. Hoping you're bearing with me, because it's there's quite a lot of fiddly stuff going on here. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to come to the properties, and I'm going to rotate that group 180. And I'm going to take this mask and undo that rotation. And then I'm going to duplicate it and call it A flap top. And I want the front text for this, drag it into there, like so. Come to the mask, properties, and rotate that 180. And set the X rotation for the group to 0. So, just to go through that again, the B flat bottom, the group is rotated through 180. The flap is not rotated. The flap mask is not rotated. For the A flap, I have no rotation of the group, but I've rotated the flap. Then we're going to come to the interesting bit, which is to come to this group here, and I'm going to come to my library, behaviors, parameter, custom. Now the custom is quite a useful thing to know about, so I'm going to apply that, come to the inspector, and I'm going to add properties transform rotation X. And then I'm going to make sure I'm at frame 0. I'm going to keyframe it. I'm going to advance to frame 6, and I'm going to set a rotation of 180. And now you'll see that flaps down. And the good thing about that is that I can move this animation anywhere I want on the timeline, the custom behavior, and when I move it, it will move the animation with it. It saves me having to go into the keyframe editor and move it. In actual fact, what I'm going to do in this instance is I'm going to come to frame 48, 2 seconds in. I'm going to hit Shift square bracket, and you'll see that that moves the behavior to start at that frame. There we go. So this is all starting to come together. If I now play that, you'll see that flaps down from M to T. Here we go. There's a problem here, and this is an Apple related problem. It relates to how the anti-aliasing works in Motion. So we're seeing the underlying letter of the sort of back of the flap, as it were. Don't worry about this. We're going to take care of all of that at the end. I actually quite like it. I think it's almost like a real world effect, like the paint has spilled over, and you're actually seeing the back letter. But if you don't like it, I'll show you how to get rid of that in the end. Okay, I'm going to make one new group, and I'm going to call this slot 1. And I'm going to take those various flaps, and I'm going to drag it into the slot 1 group. Close that down. And then I'm going to turn my slots grid back on again. And I'm going to take my slot 1 group, and I'm going to hit Command D and call it slot 2. Hold down the Alt or Option key as I twirl open slot 2, and you'll see what happens is all the groups inside get opened up in one go. Very handy trick to know. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to select all these flap masks together. So in order to do that, I'm going to hold down the Command key and select them like so. Then I'm going to come to the transform, and I'm going to move them along like that till I get to -343. And you'll see that's just masking now the new letter. And that means that we're starting to build it up very quickly. And I think you see my point about organizing yourself. Essentially, I'm going to just do this for all the remaining slots. And so let's just do one more. I'm going to duplicate slot 2. call it slot 3, Alt 12 open, Command to select all the flat masks, come to the properties. This time I'm going to set a value of minus 205, that moves that over, and duplicate again, call this slot 4, hope you can bear with me, Alt 12, Command select, come to the properties. This time I'm going to set it to minus 205. No, that's not right. Minus 69. Close it up again. Duplicate it. You can go away and have a cup of coffee while I'm doing this, or whatever you want to do. Actually, I'm going to skip forward because I think you get the idea by now. See you in a bit. Okay, while you were having fun, I was slogging away through this. And now I've got all my slots all filled, and I've got my animation. There's a few more things we need to do to get it looking good. One of the things is we need to offset the animation position, because we don't really want them all happening at the same time. So there's a clever trick for doing that, and that is to use this search box here. And I'm going to type in the word custom, because you remember that was what our behavior was called. And there you go. All those behaviors are now showing together and nothing else. It makes it very easy to just adjust them. So really, what I would do is I would just go through and just manually shift them around randomly. I mean, you know, you're probably more of a perfectionist than I am. I bet you are. Not difficult. So I'm just really sliding these around at random so they don't all happen at the same time, which is more like a actual departure board. There you go. I think you can see that. You can see how incredibly easy that was. So that's a useful trick, really. If you've got a parameter that's got a name that you can fish out like that, maybe think of naming your items so that you can use this function. Really, really saves a lot of time. What I wanted to point out actually is that what we can do is we're not now stuck with this text. So if we wanted to do motion 6 or whatever, this text is completely editable. Obviously you've got to have 8 characters, but you could, for example, I could do a bit of promotion here and type in Tokyo UK. So you can really see how having been organised with this has set us up really nicely. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing, which is to add a light. So Command Option L to make a light. I'm going to set the intensity to 400. I'm going to set its position to, let's see, minus 500, 150 on Y, and 350 on Z, like that. So it's coming from the left. Looks quite nice. What we need to do though is we need to turn on the shadows here. Open this box, and this is what really sells the effect, I think, is seeing the shadows on the flaps. But we need to make sure that the softness is up in the shadow parameter there. Let's also add a camera. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera to minus 75 on X and minus 45 on Y, and leave it at 0 on Z. You know what's wrong here is our slots grid slots is not 3D. Turn that slots grid into 3D and it pops back into place. Let's turn off this 3D grid view, which is don't much like. There we go. And the camera, I'm going to add a behavior to that. Library behaviors, camera, sweep. Apply that. Inspector. I'm going to start at minus 30. I'm going to end at minus 15. So we're looking at it from the side. Now this, depending on your machine, this is not the fastest thing in the world to render, so or even update. So you're going to have to be a little bit patient with it. But you can see that that's actually looking really nice. Now we've got the shadow and the light and everything happening together. Let me quickly show you what I meant about sorting out that center line. I'm going to turn off the camera while we do so. So I'm going to move that slots grid to the top of the composition. That's Command Shift backwards square bracket. I'm going to make a new group, Command Shift N. Drag the slots grid above that, and in this new group I'm going to hit the rectangle tool, draw out a rectangle across that area there. I'm going to center it up, set the fill color to black, and then I'm going to move it forward, Alt Z, like so, by 1 pixel. I also need to move my slots grid forward, again by 1 pixel. And then I'm just going to come to this rectangle and we're going to scale it down on Y, probably to about there. And what I'll do is I'll turn the lighting off so it's not being lit, and that's just a black hole going through like that. And that takes care of the unwanted mess there. Turn the camera back on and you can see we've got a nice tidy result. And one other thing you want to probably do, which really will tax your computer but I think is pretty essential for this, is to turn on motion blur when you render it, and that'll really make those flaps look good as they come down. You can see what's happening there. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I hope that was interesting, and I'll see you again next time.